August 1941. The German war machine was rolling toward Leningrad like an unstoppable steel tide. Villages burned, roads were choked with refugees, and every Soviet unit on the map seemed to be retreating. The Wehrmacht believed victory was only days away. Their commanders spoke of Leningrad as if it were already taken. But in a quiet forest near Krasnogvardnetsk, 5 Soviet tanks waited in absolute silence. Inside one of them sat a man whose name would soon become legend, Senior Lieutenant Zinovy Kolobanov. He did not know that within a few hours, he would rewrite the meaning of armored warfare. He only knew one thing: retreat was no longer an option. The road ahead belonged to the enemy, and someone had to stop them. Kolobanov commanded a KV-1 heavy tank, a machine the Germans feared and barely understood. Its armor was so thick that most German shells simply bounced off, but its size made it slow, clumsy, and vulnerable in open combat. Kolobanov understood this better than anyone. He knew his tank was not built for heroic charges. It was built for traps. And today, he was about to set one. His crew waited in a carefully chosen ambush position near a narrow road between marshes. Trees concealed their silhouette. Mud limited maneuvering. The terrain itself became their ally. Kolobanov looked through his periscope and whispered a sentence that sounded calm but carried enormous weight. We let them come closer, very close. The first German tanks appeared as dark shapes in the distance. Panzer III and Panzer IV vehicles moved confidently, almost casually like hunters walking into a forest that had never betrayed them before. The Germans believed Soviet resistance here was broken. They believed the road was safe. Kolobanov counted them slowly. 1, 2, 5, 10. The column stretched further than he expected. Behind the tanks came armored cars and supply vehicles. Perfect target. His gunner waited, finger trembling slightly on the trigger. Sweat rolled down his face inside the steel box. The engine was off. Not a sound. Even breathing felt too loud. Kolobanov waited until the lead tank reached the exact point he had marked in his mind. Then he gave the order. The KV-1 fired. The first German tank exploded in a violent flash of fire and metal. Before the Germans could understand what happened, a second shot destroyed the last tank in the column. The road was instantly sealed. The German unit was trapped between 2 burning wrecks. Panic spread like electricity. Turrets turned wildly. Radios crackled with confused voices. And then the KV-1 fired again. Another tank burned. And another. The ambush had begun. German shells slammed into Kolobanov's tank. Sparks flew inside the hull. The crew flinched at every impact, but the armor held. Again and again, German rounds failed to penetrate. Outside, German commanders screamed orders, but there was nowhere to go. The marshes swallowed any vehicle that tried to leave the road. Kolobanov fired with cold precision. He did not rush. He did not waste ammunition. Each shot was calculated. Each shot removed another piece from the enemy column. The Germans were no longer attacking. They were surviving. One German tank attempted to turn its turret towards the hidden KV-1. Kolobanov noticed it immediately. He ordered his gunner to eliminate it first. The shell pierced the side armor. Flames burst from the hatch. Another crew tried to escape their burning vehicle, only to be caught in machine gun fire from Kolobanov's supporting tanks hidden nearby. This was not just a battle. It was a surgical execution of an entire armored unit. The Germans could not see their enemy. They only felt its presence with every explosion. Inside the KV-1, the air became thick with smoke and heat. The crew's ears rang from constant firing. Communication was reduced to gestures and short shouts. Yet morale was rising with every destroyed target. They were no longer defending. They were dominating. Kolobanov realized something unbelievable was happening. A single tank, his tank, was holding an entire German advance. The myth of German invincibility was collapsing in real time, under his crosshair. German artillery finally joined the fight, Explosions rocked the ground around the KV-1. Earth and branches fell onto the hull. A shell jammed the turret ring. The tank could no longer rotate. For a moment, everything seemed lost, but Kolobanov did not panic. He ordered the driver to reposition the entire vehicle instead of the turret. Slowly, painfully, the KV-1 turned its massive body to bring the gun back on target. The Germans thought the Soviet tank was disabled. They were wrong. Another German tank advanced cautiously, believing the Soviet giant was finished. Kolobanov waited until it came within perfect range. One shot, direct hit. The turret flew apart like a broken toy. German confidence shattered completely. Some crews abandoned their vehicles. Others tried to reverse, only to crash into burning wrecks behind them. Smoke covered the road like a curtain hiding a massacre. And through that smoke, the KV-1 kept firing. When the firing finally slowed, silence returned to the battlefield. 22 German tanks lay destroyed. Dozens of armored vehicles were disabled. The road was no longer a road. It was a graveyard of steel. Kolobanov's tank bore more than 100 impact marks. Not one had penetrated. The KV-1 still stood, still alive, still ready. The crew sat in stunned silence, unable to fully understand what they had just achieved. They had done the impossible. They had stopped an army with a single ambush. But the story did not end there. German command could not believe the reports. They assumed exaggeration, propaganda, or madness. No single Soviet tank could destroy an entire armored column. Yet reconnaissance confirmed the truth. The road near Krasnoyarsk was blocked by wreckage. Their advance was delayed, their confidence shaken. And somewhere in that forest, Soviet forces had proven that courage and intelligence could defeat superior numbers. Kolobanov became a legend among his comrades, but history would not reward him immediately. Politics, confusion, and chaos of war buried his name for years. His victory was recorded, but not celebrated as it should have been. He returned to duty, fought again, was wounded, and survived the war quietly. Meanwhile, the story of his ambush lived in whispers, in veterans' memories, and in forgotten reports. Only decades later did historians fully understand the scale of what Kolobanov had done. His battle was not just about destroyed tanks, it was about psychology, about breaking the illusion that German armor was unstoppable, about proving that preparation beats aggression, that intelligence beats arrogance, and that sometimes history is changed not by massive armies, but by a single decision made in silence. Imagine the German commander that day, looking at the map, confident of progress. And then, imagine him receiving the report. An entire column gone. No enemy seen. No survivors explaining what happened. Only burned metal and questions. That is how legends are born. Not from noise, but from disbelief. Kolobanov never called himself a hero. He simply said he did his duty. But history knows better. His ambush became one of the most devastating single-tank actions in World War II, and his name deserves to stand next to the greatest commanders of armored warfare, because on that August day in 1941, Zinovy Kolobanov did not just stop tanks, he stopped fear. And perhaps the most terrifying part for the enemy was not the destroyed tanks, not the burning steel, not even the silence of the battlefield after the ambush. The most terrifying part was the question that now lived inside every German report, every Stabnaya Karta, every frightened radio transmission. If one Soviet tank could do this, how many more were hiding in the forests? German reconnaissance officers studied the wreckage with disbelief. They counted holes in the KV-1's armor and realized something chilling. Most shells had not penetrated. The Soviet tank had not survived by luck. It had survived by design, by preparation, by discipline. This was not chaos. This was control. For the first time since the invasion began, German commanders were forced to consider something unthinkable. The Red Army was learning. They began to imagine forests not as empty terrain, but as living traps. Every shadow could now hide another Kolobanov. Every narrow road could become a grave. Fear does not arrive with explosions. The German advance toward Leningrad did continue, on paper, on maps, in official communiques. But in reality, it had changed forever. The speed was gone. The confidence was broken. The rhythm of victory had been interrupted. Orders became cautious. Reconnaissance intensified. Columns slowed. Units hesitated at forest edges. Commanders demanded more artillery, more air cover, more confirmation before movement. And in war, hesitation is deadly. The German machine had been built on certainty, on momentum, on the belief that resistance would collapse under pressure. Kolobanov's ambush did not destroy an army, but it damaged its soul. Soldiers whispered about a ghost tank, about a monster hidden in the woods, about Soviet crews that refused to die, about armor that could not be broken. Doubt began to spread through the ranks like a quiet disease, and doubt is always the first crack in any empire. Kolobanov's KV-1 would eventually fall silent, like all machines. Steel wears out. Engines break. War consumes everything. But what never faded was the decision made inside that steel box. The decision to wait, to calculate, to trust terrain more than strength, to trust patience more than speed. Military academies would later analyze his ambush in diagrams and formulas. Historians would debate numbers. Officers would argue about tactics. But none of them would ever fully capture what really mattered: the moment when a human mind defeated a system. Kolobanov did not win because his tank was stronger. He won because he understood fear, geometry, timing, and responsibility. He understood that every second of waiting saved lives. His courage was not loud. It did not scream. It did not charge. It simply stayed. And sometimes, staying is the bravest act of all. This was not a movie scene. There was no heroic music, no slow motion, no perfect camera angles. There was only sweat burning in eyes, metal shaking under impact, lungs filled with smoke, and hands trembling from recoil. This was not propaganda. No slogans were shouted, no banners were raised, only whispered commands and mechanical sounds. This was not exaggeration. Every shell hole existed. Every burned tank had a crew. Every scream had a voice. This was a real road near Krasnogvardeysk, real mud, real trees, real fire. And inside a real tank sat a real man who understood that history does not wait for permission. It only waits for those brave enough to stop it. Kolobanov did not try to become a legend. He simply refused to let his soldiers die for nothing. And this was only the beginning of his legend, because legends are not born in medals. They're born in moments that should have been impossible. Kolobanov would survive the war. He would live quietly. He would watch others receive fame. He would carry his memory alone. The German command was in chaos. Reports from Krasnogvardeysk had reached division headquarters, and no one could believe the figures. More than 20 tanks destroyed by a single KV-1. Officers argued over the maps, tracing the ambush location, trying to imagine how a single machine could hold an entire column. Reconnaissance planes had flown overhead, and the photographs confirmed the destruction, yet it seemed impossible. Letters and telegrams reached the Lin with hesitant phrasing. Enemy armor destroyed, cause uncertain. The Wehrmacht, accustomed to linear victories, now faced doubt. Doubt that would linger longer than any temporary setback. Soldiers whispered about a ghost tank in the forest, a machine that appeared from nowhere and disappeared again, leaving ruin in its wake. German field units were ordered to move cautiously. Every column slowed,
Commanders demanded constant communication, and every forested area became suspect. Maps were redrawn, positions reconsidered. Engineers examined the destroyed tanks with meticulous care, trying to determine if it had been a trap, a flaw in their tactics, or some unprecedented Soviet innovation. Panzer crews spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories of the steel beast that had ended their advance. For the first time, fear became tangible among the Germans, not the abstract fear of Soviet forces, but a very personal, immediate terror that one small mistake could mean destruction. This fear spread from the front lines to command posts, infecting the machine of the Wehrmacht in a way no artillery barrage could.
Kolobanov, meanwhile, had moved his KV-1 to a hidden position deep in the forest. Exhaustion gripped the crew. Hands trembled, muscles ached, and every sense was heightened. They had survived hours of continuous fire and near constant threat. The forest around them was still, almost reverent. Smoke rose in thin ribbons from the burning wrecks left behind, casting a ghostly haze that blurred the line between reality and legend. Kolobanov's mind, however, was clear. He knew the ambush had been successful, but he also knew that danger remained. German reinforcements could arrive at any moment. He scanned the trees, listening to the faint sounds of distant engines and the occasional crack of artillery, ready to move again if necessary. News of the ambush began traveling along Soviet lines. Soldiers, exhausted and demoralized after weeks of retreat, heard whispers of the KV-1 that had stopped a German column. Some refused to believe it at first, thinking it was exaggeration, propaganda, or a hallucination of a desperate mind. But as reports were verified and survivors told their stories, the tale gained credibility. Kolobanov, who had remained focused on survival rather than recognition, became a symbol of hope. His calm, calculated decisions in the midst of chaos inspired other crews to adopt similar strategies. The idea of patience, preparation, and precision began to spread quietly through units, a small but vital spark in a war otherwise dominated by overwhelming force. The Germans did not give up. They sent reconnaissance units and air support to verify the damage and ensure that no Soviet reinforcements lay in wait. Each attempt to approach the forest ended with caution, hesitancy, and sometimes withdrawal. The once bold columns were reduced to slow, measured advances, scrutinized from the air and by scouts who moved cautiously through the trees. Soldiers now feared the forest more than the open battlefield. Every shadow seemed alive, every branch a possible threat. Kolobanov's victory had created a psychological battlefield as much as a physical one. His ambush had changed not only the pace of the advance, but the mindset of the enemy. Kolobanov's life after the ambush returned slowly to routine, though nothing was ever routine for someone who had survived such a concentrated burst of violence. Days were spent in repair and maintenance, checking the KV-1 for hidden damage and ensuring that every system functioned perfectly. Nights were spent in restless sleep, dreams filled with fire, smoke, and the echo of explosions. Letters from family reached him irregularly, providing a brief, fragile tether to normal life. He wrote back sparingly, carefully concealing the full scope of what had happened, knowing that the enormity of his actions could seem unbelievable or even dangerous to explain. The Germans, meanwhile, conducted post-battle analyses that stretched across weeks. Reports were compiled, cross-referenced, and sent up the chain of command. Questions were asked. How could a single tank destroy so many? What errors allowed the KV-1 to remain hidden? Were Soviet crews more skilled than intelligence had assumed? The answers were inconclusive, and the uncertainty gnawed at officers accustomed to certainty and obedience. The KV-1, though not invincible, had proven that knowledge, patience, and discipline could surpass numbers and technical superiority, a lesson the German military would never forget. Kolobanov's reputation among his comrades grew quietly but steadily. Officers began to speak of him in respectful tones, and younger tank crews studied his ambush strategy as an example of tactical ingenuity. In briefings, his patience was highlighted. In informal conversations, his calm under fire was admired. Yet Kolobanov himself remained modest.
insisting that he had done only what any competent officer would do. He avoided publicity, preferring the anonymity of the forest and the hum of the engine to speeches or accolades. His focus remained on survival, on duty, on protecting his crew and advancing the mission. Months passed. Kolobanov participated in several more engagements, some of them intense and costly. He was wounded during one encounter, receiving medical attention that took him away from the front temporarily. Even while injured, his mind remained sharp, analyzing enemy movements, planning ambushes, and advising fellow officers. He survived where others did not, partly through luck, partly through skill, and partly through an instinctive understanding of armored warfare. Each day added to his experience, each encounter refining his ability to anticipate enemy actions. Stories of his ambush spread not just among soldiers, but eventually through the Soviet command structure. Documents reference the destroyed German column as an extraordinary example of tactical precision under extreme conditions. Kolobanov's name appeared in reports and awards lists, though recognition was slow and subdued, a consequence of the bureaucratic chaos of wartime administration. Still, his actions became an unspoken standard for Soviet tank crews, a benchmark of what careful observation, patience, and bravery could accomplish, even against overwhelming odds.